Hi everyone and welcome to our channel Rack to Run, where we discuss with industry leaders issues around AI infrastructure and data centers. And joining us today is Pritesh Swamy, Head of Data Center Research and Advisory, Asia Pacific at Cushman Wakefield. So Pritesh, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Ivan.
So Pritesh, when do you expect Asia Pacific to overtake the US in data center capacity, and who's leading that push?
So when you talk about APAC taking over US, we're talking about it in colocation capacity terms.
Yeah.
Uh, so with the total development that's happening within Asia Pacific across 14 markets that we track, we expect that APAC will become bigger somewhere around 2028 or 2029 or early 2029. So that's the time horizon we're looking at with the construction timelines in mind.
Pritesh, why do you think that collocation
And
is so dominant in Asia Pacific when compared to other regions?
I would say there were multiple reasons for it. Firstly, if you look at the markets that are spread across, there are multiple countries. So there are 14 sizable countries where we have got data center presence. All of these countries have very different regulatory aspects. Some of the countries have very complex processes for approval and taking permission for construction or environment and telecom. So there are many layers to it where data center companies or operators need to get approvals, which is not easy. So somebody entering like a hyperscaler and doing self-build is going to be a very time-consuming process for them to enable development on their own in each of these markets. In addition to that, construction and the local nuances, there are language barriers in multiple countries where, you'll need local expertise to develop data centers in each of those markets. So and plus, the overall infrastructure development was an early stage as compared to the US. Maybe US started, 20 years earlier, or they're ahead of us in terms of the overall infra development. So there are multiple factors that have impacted the presence of hyperscaler self-development in the region. And it's only the last few years that hyperscalers have also started showing interest within Asia Pacific. And to scale up fast, I think colocation offers the best opportunity to any kind of hyperscaler or a cloud service provider who would want to have presence. So it gives you speed to market, it gives you access to people who have more control or access to the market in terms of language or getting the processes approved or getting all the permissions and things like these. So I think these are multiple layers that have enabled the colocation market to pace ahead of the self-development program.
Great. Pritesh, and what's holding back growth in newer markets like Vietnam, Thailand, or the Philippines compared to other markets that are growing faster?
So for these specific markets, from an overall presence of infrastructure perspective, if you look at it, they need to have subsea cable connectivity, stable power, regulatory aspect, water, multiple things are there. In addition to that, local demand also needs to be there. So plus the region is so well connected or rather smaller, especially the Southeast Asian market where, Singapore can be a hub which can serve multiple locations. So initially, the development started where regulatory or the environment in terms of infrastructure, the approvals and processes were good, such as Singapore. And Singapore became the hub for the Southeast Asian market. So everybody started serving the region from markets such as Singapore. It's only in the recent years where countries such as Philippines, Vietnam have enabled their regulatory processes and approval processes and multiple things where they're making it easier for operators to come into their markets. In the last few years, maybe 3 or 5 years, it's not developed at the same pace as, say, India or Malaysia. But we anticipate with these newer regulatory policies, it will enable operators to go to these markets too.
Yeah, sounds interesting. And Pritesh, how are space and regulatory limits shaping expansion in markets such as Singapore or Hong Kong?
Singapore and Hong Kong are currently, I would say, very different markets.
Mhm.
Singapore has developed much faster and it has been at a similar, close to 1,000 megawatt capacity for last maybe 5 years when the government put in a stop on new developments and they decided to allow development which is more regulated. So the earlier DCCFA allowed 80 megawatts of power to be developed in addition to what was limited earlier on. But after that, again, there has been no new development that has been permitted in Singapore. We are anticipating additional 300 megawatts will be released in the DCCFA 2 that they are terming it as. wherein the 300 megawatt of power would be allocated to maybe one or multiple operators. So we
Yeah.
haven't got any clarity on that, but it is likely to be announced maybe later this year or early next year, wherein the 300 megawatt of capacity will be allocated to bidders for in Singapore. So that's a new development. Singapore has always remained as the key market or a hub for serving the region. It continues to host workloads for the entire Southeast Asia region as such. However, the markets are evolving, and because of restrictions, we've seen Johor has got most of the capacity as a spillover from Singapore. It started as a development from a spillover demand, and it continues to grow. So Singapore has its more controlled market, I would say. On the other side, Hong Kong has been in a steady growth phase, but it is not as big as Singapore. Hong Kong is close to 500 to 600 megawatts in operational capacity. It has a development pipeline, but the demand and the capacity workloads are not serving as wide a region as Singapore does. So Hong Kong predominantly gives you gateway to mainland China. It also serves in the region as such, but the overall capacity and the workloads have remained much smaller. Over the next 3 to 5 years, we anticipate Hong Kong would also add maybe 300 to 500 megawatts of new capacity, and
Yeah.
it will become maybe close to, or if not over, but at least close to 1 gigawatt in total capacity.
Great. Pritesh, what is the role that US investors are playing in Asia Pacific data center boom?
So US has always been one of the predominant operator or led country where the operators who are based or headquartered in US have a significant presence within the Asia Pacific region. From an operational capacity perspective, the US currently accounts for almost 25% of the operational capacity, IT megawatts that are live. In addition to that, when you're looking at the under construction and the plant capacities, the US owned or invested data centers will account for close to 30% of the capacity. So that shows that one market within the Asia Pacific region has a very significant presence, which is the US. And despite the announcements on tariffs, on regulations, on different aspects, we don't think it will slow down or the share of the US would reduce in Asia Pacific because there's significant presence, and the pipeline is also having significant presence of the American invested or American owned operators. So I think that will continue in the next 3 to 5 years at least.
Great. Pritesh, according to a recent report by Cushman and Wakefield, the pipeline of their center projects in Asia Pacific by 2030 will require an overall capex of more than $150 billion. Where is that money coming from mainly?
There has been a shift, I would say, in the terms of where the money is coming from. Maybe up until 3 years ago, most operators used to have their own capital. It could be predominantly raised through banks debt, or it could be their own capital from balance sheet. But over the last 2 years, private equity funds have shown significant interest in supporting or having a share in the data center market. So several private equity from the US, from Europe, and within Asia Pacific as well have been supporting or deploying capital within the platform or at an entity level or even at an asset level. So most of the development or the capital is now coming from significant private equity operators. In addition to that, we are also seeing several joint ventures that have come in, wherein a real estate developer, locally based real estate developer, would do the capital deployment for building the core and shell and acquiring the land, whereas the operator would come in and do the fit outs in terms of MEP and do the operations. So the capital deployment has also been balanced or shared between real estate developer and an operator. So that's a model that has taken place in countries like India, in Malaysia, in Indonesia. We've seen significant development happening in this format as well. So I think these are the two main ways where the capital is being deployed, and that is likely to continue over the next 3 to 5 years at least.
That's really interesting. Pritesh, I would like to thank you again for your insights and for your time today.
Thank you so much, Ivan. Pleasure being today.
And thank you all for watching, and please stay tuned for more conversations on this critical space.